It's time for Fresh Oil with singer-songwriter and pastor Keith Manley. A program designed to minister the gospel of God's grace and to bring fresh oil to the brokenhearted. And now, with today's program, Pastor Keith Manley.
Welcome to Fresh Oil. I'm Pastor Keith, and we're in day 3 of this new series, Forgotten Women of the Genealogy. And I'm so glad you're with me because today's episode is one I've really been looking forward to. I've spent the past couple of months studying Ruth in the Bible. The woman we're going to spend time with today is one of the most beloved of all the 5 women in Matthew's genealogy. She was a Moabite widow named Ruth, whose name has become a synonym for faithfulness itself, and whose love story with a man named Boaz is one of the most complete, most beautiful shadows of the gospel in the entire Old Testament. Matthew chapter 1 and verse 5 records it. It simply says, Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. 5 words. But the book that bears her name, only the second book in all of Scripture named for a woman. It tells a story that deserves to be preached from every pulpit in the nation and in every language. Let me start at the beginning because setting matters enormously for this story. To understand the context, the book of Ruth opens with a single sentence that tells you almost everything you need to know about the moral landscape in her day. It says this, in the days when the judges ruled. Now that phrase, to any Jewish reader of the ancient world, was the equivalent of saying, in the worst of times. Because the period of the judges was an era in Israelite history when the nation had no king. There was no central authority and, most critically, no sustained covenant faithfulness. The last verse of the book of Judges summarizes the entire era in one devastating sentence. This is what it said. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is the world into which the story of Ruth steps into. There's a man named Elimelech. His name in Hebrew means, my God is king. And it becomes one of the tragic ironies of the story because he lived in Bethlehem with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And when a famine struck the land, Elimelech made a decision that the text treats very quietly. But he took his family out of Israel and they went to the land of Moab. Now I need to pause for a minute and make sure you understand the weight of that decision. Moab was not a neutral destination. The Moabites were the descendants of Lot and his older daughter, born out of the incestuous relationship that took place after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that story is told in Genesis 19, and it's not a comfortable one. More than that, Deuteronomy 23, verse 3, is very explicit. God cursed the Moabites. He said this, no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. Now, this was not just a cultural preference. This was a hard covenant boundary. Elimelech was taking the covenant family to the land of the excluded. And while they were there, both sons married Moabite women. Mahlon married Ruth, and Chilion married Orpah. And then Elimelech dies. And then both sons died. And Naomi, she's left in this foreign land without a husband, without sons, without the ability to produce any more children, without any natural means of recovery. She was, by any calculation, she was finished. And when she heard that the famine in Israel had ended, that the Lord had visited his people and given them bread, she decided to return to Bethlehem. Interesting enough, the name Bethlehem in Hebrew, Beit is the word for house, and Lehem is the word for bread. So the very name of Bethlehem, the place where David would descend from, the very name means house of bread. And yet famine hit the land with judgment from God. And they left the land of bread to go into the cursed land that God had forbidden. And so she's going to go back to Bethlehem because she hears that the famine has ended. And she released both of her daughter-in-laws from any obligation to follow her. She said, go back to your mother's houses. May the Lord show kindness to you as you showed kindness to my dead sons and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the house of another husband. And she kissed them goodbye. And Orpah wept. And I want to say something in defense of Orpah that rarely gets said. Orpah is usually the villain in this story, the one that chose comfort over covenant. But Naomi herself told her to go back. Going back was the reasonable thing. It made every sense. Going back was the safe thing. Going back was the thing that anyone watching from the outside would have called wise. So Orpah, she goes back, and the text doesn't condemn her for it. But Ruth, that's a different story. She clung to Naomi. The Hebrew word for clung here is the word davak, and it's one of the most theologically significant words in the Old Testament. It's the same word used in Genesis 2:24 when it says a man should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. That's the word davak. Cling, hold fast, permanently attached. It's a word used in Deuteronomy 10:20 when God commanded Israel to cling to him and to his ways. But Ruth performed toward Naomi the same way of clinging that covenant required of Israel towards God. And then she speaks these words, the words that have been spoken at weddings, at memorials, at bedsides, and in moments of great personal courage for 3,000 years. This is what she said. Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do to me and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Now, I want to stay in that speech just for a few moments today, because the theology in it is extraordinary. First, your people shall be my people. Now, Ruth is not simply agreeing to travel to a new country. She's agreeing to renounce her national identity. She's choosing to become something she was not born as. In the ancient world, this was a profound and costly declaration. Your people were your identity, your protection, your legal standing, and Ruth was laying it all down. Secondly, this is the central theological statement which she makes. She says, your God shall be my God. Ruth converted, voluntarily, uncoerced, in the presence of a woman who had told her 3 times to go home. Ruth declares her allegiance to the God of Israel. She didn't even know what awaited her in Bethlehem, whether she'd be received or not, because remember, the Moabites were not allowed in. She didn't know if Naomi had any future to offer her, but she made her declaration of faith to God on the basis of what she had seen of his character through Naomi's life. And perhaps through Naomi's grief, she got a first-row seat of that. The Hebrew word that runs like a river through this entire book of Ruth is the word hesed. I did a program on it a while back, the Hebrew word hesed. And it's the word for loving kindness. Most of the English translations call it loving kindness or even steadfast love or even mercy. Hesed is the covenant love of God. It's God's committed, active, stubborn, faithful love that does not release its hold even when it has every legal right to do so. It's the word behind Psalm 23's declaration that goodness and hesed, mercy, shall follow me all the days of my life. It's the word behind Lamentations 3:22 when it says, it is of the Lord's hesed, the Lord's mercy, or loving kindness, that we're not consumed because his compassions fail not. He makes his mercies new every morning. When Ruth clung to Naomi on that road, she was performing loving kindness. She was doing for a woman with nothing to offer what God does for his people when they have nothing to offer. And the rest of the story is God performing hesed back, his loving kindness through every providential detail in the story of Ruth, through every seemingly coincidental encounter until Ruth is fully restored and fully home. Now they arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Ruth went out to glean in the fields. Now, to glean was to pick up the grain left behind by the harvesters. It was kind of like ancient welfare system that God had built into the law through the commandments of Leviticus 19. And it was provision for the poor, the widow, and the foreigner. And as the sovereign hand of God would have it, she ended up in the field of a man named Boaz. Now, what I love about this story is you see providence written all over it. You see the sovereignty of God as he orchestrates her steps. Boaz owns the field. The name in Hebrew comes from a root that means in him is strength, Boaz. And he is everything the name implies. He's described as a man of great wealth. The Hebrew phrase is Gibor Kail, and it's a mighty man of valor. The same phrase used for the military heroes of Israel, David's mighty men of valor. He's a man of standing, a man of character, and crucially, he's a relative of Naomi's dead husband Elimelech, which means he's a potential Goel. Such an important word in Hebrew. It means the kinsman redeemer. It was one of the most profound theological categories in the entire Hebrew legal and covenant system. When a member of the covenant family fell into poverty, when they lost their land, they lost their freedom, or they died without an heir, the Goel, the nearest male relative, had the right and the responsibility to step in and redeem what was lost, to buy back the land, to raise up the family name, to restore what had been taken. The Goel was not just a legal mechanism. He was a picture or a shadow of the God who calls himself the Redeemer of Israel, who says in Isaiah 41, "Fear not, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold you with my righteous right hand." And Boaz saw Ruth. He asked about her. His workers told him that she had come back from Moab with Naomi and that she had asked to glean, had been working in the field without rest since early morning. And Boaz went to her and he spoke some of the most generous words in the entire Old Testament. He told her, "Stay in my field. Stay with my workers. I've instructed them not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and drink from the water that my young men have drawn." Ruth fell on her face and she asked, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes, seeing that I'm a foreigner?" And Boaz said, "All the city knows that you're a worthy woman, a woman of valor." Like Proverbs 31. He had heard what she did for Naomi, and he had heard about her loyalty and her sacrifice, and he chose to honor her before she had done anything for him. Now, eventually, through the careful, honorable steps of covenant procedure that Naomi wisely guided, Boaz exercised his right as the kinsman redeemer. And there was a closer relative who had the first right of redemption, but when he understood that redeeming the property meant he had to take Ruth as his wife and raise up the name of the dead husband on his inheritance, he declined, and he was not willing to risk his own inheritance. But Boaz, without hesitation, said, "I will redeem it." He did redeem the property. He redeemed Ruth. He stood in the city gate, the ancient legal assembly, before the elders, and he said, "Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." And the elders blessed him, and the people blessed the union, and Ruth and Boaz became husband and wife. Now, this is a beautiful story, friend, because it's a story of how Christ went to the cross to pay for us, to redeem us, to ransom us. When God chose to include Ruth in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, he made a decision to show us that the ordinary people are accepted by God. Ruth's story is our story. Ruth the Moabitess became Ruth, the great ancestor of Jesus Christ, who would later be born in that same town of Bethlehem, the house of bread. Walk in grace, friend. God loves you with an everlasting love. He really, really does.
What if the family tree of Jesus wasn't filled with perfect people, but broken, scandal-marked, courageous women? In The Genealogy of Hope, 5 women who changed everything, author Keith Manley brings to life the powerful stories of Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. 5 unlikely women woven into the lineage of Christ. A woman who risked everything for justice, a prostitute who chose faith over fear, a foreigner who found redemption, a grieving mother who carried sorrow, and a teenage girl who said yes to the impossible. This is not a genealogy of perfection, it's a genealogy of hope. Discover how God writes straight with crooked lines, and how your story can be redeemed too. The Genealogy of Hope by Keith Manley.
Check out my new book, The Genealogy of Hope, available now on Amazon.com in hardcover, paperback, or the Kindle ebook.
Thanks for joining us today for Fresh Oil with Pastor Keith Manley. Fresh Oil is an outreach of Grace Family Church in Rockford, Illinois, and can be heard each weekday at this same time. You can reach us online at weneedgod.com. Until next time, remember, God's love for you is unconditional, and He makes His mercies new every morning.